Karen started at the dock in heels, screaming at my boat like it owed her money. Then she sank it. Literally sank it because it disrupted the community aesthetic. What she didn't know was that boat floated on my lake, on my land, under my name, with legal boundaries older than her Botox. That's when I decided if she wanted to mess with a landowner, she'd better learn to swim. They say you can't buy peace, but you sure can inherit it. I live on 78 acres of what used to be my great-granddad's logging land, wrapped around Arrow Creek Lake like a flannel shirt around an old man's belly. My name's Colton Shaw, former firefighter, now full-time porch philosopher. My place sits just above the western bend of the lake, a cedarwood cabin with a flagpole, 2 hounds that bark at clouds, and a wooden dock I rebuilt 3 times over just to get it perfect. When the wind's just right, the water hums like it remembers stories I haven't told yet. And on good days, I forget the world even exists past the tree line. That was true, until the HOA came. Eagle Heights popped up across the eastern ridge about 4 years ago, billed as a nature-first gated lifestyle community, which is rich considering they clear-cut 3 acres of pine just to build a sign. They marketed it with words like eco-synergy and holistic wellness corridors, which I think means sidewalks. Suddenly, there were identical houses in earth-tone pastels, matching solar panels and mailbox rules. People started walking their dogs in vests. Someone put up a QR code trail sign where my grandpa's old hiking marker used to be. I didn't raise hell. Not yet. I figured, live and let HOA. Besides, their welcome brochure was the most unintentionally funny thing I'd read in years. Then came the letters, soft-colored envelopes with things like friendly reminder or non-mandatory guidance printed in italics like it made their nonsense more polite. The first one asked if I could repaint my boathouse to match community aesthetic standards visible from shared shoreline views. I read it twice, laughed once, and used it to start the fireplace. A week later, I found a second letter tucked under a rock on my porch. This one objected to the tone of my no trespassing sign nailed to a birch tree. They said it was intimidating. I said it was accurate. That sign's been there since the Bush administration. I let the letters pile up in a shoebox labeled comedy. It wasn't long before the HOA started showing up like they owned the dirt they ghouled. I caught 2 clipboard cowboys measuring my dock, talking in decibels like I wasn't home. I installed trail cams, not for wildlife, for HOA incursions. And sure enough, I caught a lady in yoga pants and a man with a laminated badge walking 20 feet into my land to document visual discord. I printed the footage, stapled it to a fence post, and captioned it, "Welcome to Discovery Channel, Karen Edition." That didn't go over well. The real fun began when she showed up. Mid-50s, platinum hair so sharp it could slice brisket, oversized sunglasses, and an attitude like she personally co-wrote the HOA charter. She didn't introduce herself like a neighbor. She announced herself like a Bond villain. "I'm Karen, president of the Eagle Heights Homeowners Association." I almost asked if there was a vice president named Chad. She smiled too wide, offered a handshake I didn't take, and said she hoped we could foster compliance harmony across shared visual borders. I smiled back and said, "You're standing on private property. That's my harmony." And just like that, the fuse was lit. 2 days after her visit, I found a pastel envelope taped to my mailbox with surgical precision, sealed with a heart-shaped sticker like it was a Valentine from a stalker. Inside was a printed notice of landscape disruption, complete with grainy photos of my garden I was lying across my gravel path. "Trip hazard to community foot traffic," it said, which is rich, considering there's no public path on my land unless you count deer trails and squirrel highways. They'd drawn dotted lines on a satellite image, claiming my driveway as a potential pedestrian corridor. I almost framed it. Things got weirder fast. A group of teenagers in HOA-branded polo shirts started loitering by the lake, iPads in hand like they were surveying for a new Starbucks. One of them told me they were documenting non-compliant flora. I asked if that meant the wild lilies or the moss. He didn't laugh. The next day, a flyer appeared on every tree along my dock. "Join our watershed watch," with Karen's signature in script font below a cartoon fish wearing glasses. My lake had officially been declared a shared scenic asset by a committee I wasn't invited to. Then came the safety audit. Some guy in a reflective vest and khakis showed up at 7 a.m. on a Sunday, clipboard in one hand, a coffee cup in the other that said, "Compliance is kindness." He introduced himself as Todd, wholly Asian of external property interface. I asked if that meant spy. He chuckled nervously. I didn't. He wanted to inspect the slope of my dock ramp, said there were concerns about ADA gradient compatibility for potential community events. I told him if they ever try to hold a bake sale on my dock, they'd be greeted by 2 dogs, a shotgun-shaped thermos, and a sign that reads, "This ain't a farmer's market." He returned not long after that, this time with a pamphlet and an actual banner that said, "Better Together, Visual Unity in Shared Environments." She offered to partner on a community beautification project that involved removing my 40-year-old oak swing, repainting my shutters, prairie beige, and relocating my dock buoy because it creates directional confusion. I asked her if her Prius came with GPS or just righteous indignation. She didn't laugh either. But she did pull out a tablet and start reading from what she claimed was the Community Harmony Mandate, subsection B. I said the only mandate I recognized was the Constitution, and even that had its bad days. The final straw was a laminated notice pinned to my gate that read, "Non-compliant property under community review." Under it was a QR code labeled Report Disruption. It linked to a Google form titled Eyes on the Outlier. That's when I realized they weren't just pushing boundaries, they were trying to erase mine. This wasn't passive aggression anymore. This was paperwork warfare, HOA style. So I went into my shed, dusted off the shoebox of their pastel threats, and labeled it anew, Exhibit A. June Belle wasn't just a boat. She was a 19-foot cedar-paneled beauty my dad built in 1981 with his bare hands and a stubborn streak inherited from 5 generations of Shaw men. She had brass trim, leather seats worn smooth by summers of fishing trips and sunburnt naps, and a steering wheel that creaked exactly once when you turned hard left. She sat on my dock like a queen on her throne, quietly ruling over Arrow Creek. Karen called her an eyesore. I called her history. The first formal complaint came folded inside a glossy HOA pamphlet titled Waterfront Harmony, Guidelines for Nautical Aesthetics. Apparently, June Belle violated 6 community water visibility standards, including hole color and vintage mechanical inconsistency. In layman's terms, she looked old and sounded powerful. Karen followed up with a document stamped Eagle Heights Environmental Task Force. It accused June Belle of unregulated fuel storage and non-compliant vessel maintenance. I laughed so hard I nearly inhaled a sunflower seed. The kicker? They gave me 10 business days to remove the object of aquatic disruption or face mandatory community-driven relocation. The next morning, she was gone. I walked out onto the dock, coffee in hand, expecting the usual hum of brass on water. Instead, I found only torn ropes and silence. No drag marks, no water trail, just the empty cleats swaying in the breeze like they were mourning. I searched the shore, I checked the trail cams, nothing. That boat didn't float away. She'd been taken. I was halfway into calling the sheriff when a paddleboard slid into view, and on it, sunglasses smuggest incarnate, was Karen. She didn't say hello. She didn't apologize. She just bobbed there like a bobcat on a pool float and said, "We took the liberty of addressing your environmental hazard." I blinked. "You what?" She gestured like a game show hostess. "June Belle has been safely relocated beneath the waterline. Consider it a temporary solution pending final compliance verification." I stared. "You sank my boat." Karen tilted her head, submerged. "With care." I glanced at her clipboard, cowboys floating a few yards away, both with matching life vests and GoPros strapped to their chests like this was a nature documentary. "This isn't over," I said. She smiled. "Compliance is a journey." That night I dove, wetsuit, flashlight, weights. Arrow Creek isn't deep, but it's murky, cold, and not a place you go unless you're ready to see the dark. Took me 2 hours, but I found her. Lying on her side like a fallen soldier, June Belle was wedged in the silt 20 feet off the dock. Scratches on the hull, bow rope cleanly cut, impact dent near the stern, no accident. Someone dragged her out, sank her deliberately. When I surfaced, I wasn't just cold, I was changed. Karen hadn't just crossed a line, she'd lit it on fire and danced on the ashes. She wanted war, she just declared it. I didn't scream, I didn't call the sheriff. I didn't post a passive-aggressive rant on the neighborhood Facebook page like Karen would. I walked straight from the lake to the storage shed out back and opened the cabinet labeled Shaw Family Stuff, touch only if you have a reason. Inside, buried beneath a stack of oil-stained ball caps and one uncashed check from a roofing job in 2004, was my grandfather's old land survey folder, leather-bound, snapped shut with rusted clasps and reeking of tobacco and righteous vengeance. I unfolded the map he'd commissioned in 1965. Topographic lines, hand-drawn, notes in blue pencil, boundaries measured with a chain and compass. Every inch of our property marked, documented, and legally recorded, decades before HOA was even a whisper in some urban planner's dream journal. And then I pulled out the modern overlay from the county GIS website. Something didn't match. The HOA's headquarters, its glassy, smug little palace of bylaws and bake sales, was sitting dangerously close to the red line that marked my legal eastern boundary. Too close. I printed both maps, overlaid them on a workbench with a grid transparency, used a forestry compass, a surveyor's chain, and my grandfather's old measuring boots. Yes, boots. He'd carved hash marks into the soles. I paced from the red maple tree on the southeast edge all the way up to the utility pole near the HOA's rear patio, 36 feet. That was the difference between ambitious architecture and civil trespass. The entire back half of their building, foundation, irrigation lines, power cabling, and all was on my dirt. Built without a permit, built with HOA funds, built on a legal time bomb. Just to be sure, I invited a friend, Russ Vickery, former zoning inspector turned fishing buddy with a drone, a beer gut, and a grudge against bureaucracy. Russ flew the topo drone, ran a 3D scan, overlaid the data with county records, and cracked open a Bud Light before saying, "Son, this ain't just a mistake. This is a lawsuit in concrete." I nodded. "Think I could charge him rent?" Russ took a sip. "Charge him back rent?" "With interest and environmental fines, and probably a moral tax for the landscape." That night, I pulled out every deed, zoning map, and permit stub I'd ever kept. I wasn't going to file a complaint. I was going to drop a ledger on them so thick it would register on a fault line. I called my lawyer. Then I called my other lawyer. Then I emailed the county, the zoning board, and a journalist from the local paper who once tried to date my cousin. But before I launched anything, I needed one more confirmation. I walked up to the HOA office at sunset, clipboard in hand, maps in pocket, boots muddy from my land. I sat on their stone bench, my bench now, looked at the corner of the building, the lights on inside, silhouettes of Karen and her board huddled around a whiteboard. I smiled. "Built your empire on my soil, Karen. Hope you kept the receipt." The first document I drafted was simple. Notice of encroachment and trespass. 4 pages, clean, concise, wrapped in a tone that said, "I'm not mad. I'm surgical." I listed every square foot their headquarters occupied on my land, every drop of irrigation runoff, every beam, panel, cable, and commemorative bench they had no legal right to build. I included drone overlays, timestamp measurements, and my grandfather's survey as the final nail, and I wrote a second document. Demand for compensation. 10 years of unauthorized land use, utilities routed illegally, plus event-based fees, total amount due, $297,000, 0 cents, due in 30 days. Or else. I mailed certified copies to every HOA board member, the zoning board, county clerk, and for good measure, the local news station's Consumer Watch team. The journalist I mentioned earlier, turns out he remembered my cousin fondly and owed her an apology. That apology came in the form of a front page headline 2 days later, "Homeowner strikes back." The story went viral in town. Karen called it a smear campaign. I called it Tuesday. Their first response was classic HOA fluff. Email with 3 fonts, 2 typos, and a signature block longer than the email itself. It asked for clarity regarding your recent communications and suggested a neutral third-party mediation. I responded by sliding my invoice under their office door and stapling a laminated copy to the community bulletin board with a note that read, "Happy to mediate. I charge $300, 0 cents per hour, coffee not included." That afternoon, I started getting emails from inside. anonymous, but clearly HOA residents. Screenshots of budget meetings, photos of Karen's backyard gazebo, a $14,000 0 cents beautification project suspiciously funded by discretionary dues. One email included a photo of her at a spa retreat labeled Community Leadership Weekend. She'd used HOA money to book a resort, a massage, and a champagne brunch. The subject line read, "Is this covered under bylaws?" asking for 63 households. Then came the emergency board meeting, held in their not-so-legally situated office. I wasn't invited, but I showed up anyway. Wore my cleanest boots, a GoPro, and a denim shirt with the sleeves rolled just enough to say, "I came here to talk," or "bulldoze." Your choice. Karen was at the front, flanked by her clipboard cavalry. She froze mid-sentence when I walked in. "You can't be here," she snapped. I grinned, held up the land deed. "I'm not here. You are, on my land." The room erupted like a shaken soda. Half the board whispered. A couple of residents stood up and left. I walked to the front, calmly placed the invoice on the table, and said, 30 days. After that, I file for eviction, lien, and demolition. Or we can talk lease terms, but Karen doesn't get a seat. I walked out to someone gasping, someone clapping, and Karen muttering something about property terrorism. My response, a shrug and a smile, because when you're right and backed by land law, you don't argue. You let the dirt do the talking. I've always believed in quiet revenge. You don't need fireworks when you've got documentation, and you don't need to shout when you're backed by zoning code and 3D satellite maps. So while Karen went full meltdown, emails, flyers, HOA newsletter titled Community Under Siege, I went silent, dead silent. No interviews, no comments, not even a social post. And that silence, it drove them crazy because Karen thrived on drama she could control. And this one, she couldn't even spin. Step one was visual. I hired a film student from the community college, a kid named Aiden who thought he was the next Spielberg but could work a drone like a magician. We filmed a slow motion walkthrough of the HOA office. Camera sweeping across foundation cracks, misaligned zoning markers, a leaky downspout that fed runoff straight into my lake. We dubbed it the Unauthorized Kingdom and uploaded it privately to send to the county board and a few select reporters. One of them responded in under 10 minutes with, "This is the most satisfying thing I've ever watched." Step two was legal leverage. I had my civil lawyer Bev draft an itemized invoice broken down by square footage, events usage, utilities, and a lovely line item called visual trespass disruption. And we added interest, 4% annually, nothing crazy, just enough to make it sting. New total, $312,470, 0 cents, payment due in 20 business days, or else I file for formal eviction and seek punitive damages for environmental harm and illegal utility routing. Bev stapled it with a smile. Step three, internal collapse. The leaks got bigger. I now had full board meeting minutes, internal Slack screenshots, and photos of Karen at a backyard executive retreat, sipping sangria under string lights, paid for by the HOA Community Enrichment Fund. Turns out half the residents didn't even know they'd been charged for Karen's spa and gazebo empire. One anonymous tipper even included a memo where Karen labeled me a hostile fringe landholder with delusional legal interpretation. I printed it, framed it, and hung it in my outhouse. But the real nail came from the zoning office. After reviewing the footage, maps, and runoff evidence, they opened a formal investigation into the HOA building. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the county. Pending environmental compliance failure, temporary cease-use order, mandatory relocation or demolition required upon final inspection. Translation, their building was standing on borrowed time and borrowed land. Karen responded with a video, a black blazer, overlit kitchen background. She called the situation a targeted act of sabotage by an unstable individual exploiting legal technicalities. I nearly choked on my coffee. Lady, you sank my boat. You invaded my land. You tried to color code my dock. I'm the stable one here. Comments on her video were turned off, of course. But the HOA Facebook group had turned into a bonfire of rage. Residents demanding refunds, meetings canceled, and one guy asking if Karen's gazebo would be listed on Zillow soon. I didn't need to say a word. The ground was crumbling beneath her heels, and she hadn't even seen the bulldozer invoice yet. That was coming next. After all, this wasn't just personal anymore. This was Operation Lake Justice. Karen didn't respond to the demolition notice the county sent, at least not with anything useful. Instead, she sent out another HOA newsletter titled, "We Stand Strong," featuring a clip art eagle, a quote from a motivational calendar, and a paragraph accusing me of undermining unity with legal manipulation. I couldn't make that up if I tried. Meanwhile, her followers dwindled faster than HOA funds at a gazebo sale. Residents were jumping ship. Metaphora for now. I gave her one last chance. A hand-delivered letter, sealed with wax because pettiness is an art, offering a peaceful resolution. Relocate the structure voluntarily within 10 days. No media, no fines, just a clean exit. She tore it up in front of a Ring camera. Big mistake, because she thought I was bluffing about the final option. She thought relocate meant bulldozer. She didn't consider buoyancy. Turns out, when you build half your building on illegal ground and half on modular panels, it doesn't take much to make it move. I hired a team of engineers, one of whom moonlighted as a festival stage builder, to create a floating substructure under the office foundation. Think of it as a reverse arc. Then we installed waterproof pontoons beneath the deck supports under cover of night, took one gentle push from a hydraulic winch system, and plop, the HOA headquarters became the first office in Arrow Creek history to have a 360-degree lake view. Karen was not pleased. She showed up the next morning, red-faced and shrieking, wearing a silk blouse that hadn't seen humidity since 2018. The office was floating 20 feet offshore, bobbing gently like an entitled yacht. I stood at the dock with my coffee. "You said my boat disrupted the shoreline," I called out. "Now yours is the shoreline." Karen tried to march down to it, only to realize she'd need a canoe. One of her board members actually whispered, "It floats better than I thought." HOA residents gathered to watch. Phones came out. Comments flew. "Looks like the HOA finally detached from reality. Do we pay lakefront tax now? Can we Airbnb it?" One guy brought popcorn. Meanwhile, I posted a new sign on the lakeside trail. "Unauthorized structures may be subject to tactical flotation." Karen threatened to call the Coast Guard. I said, "Fine, as long as they brought a tow rope and a permit." The county called later that day. Their inspector, laughing hard enough to choke, said, "Technically, it's a mobile structure now, which puts it in violation of maritime use regulations on a private lake." Translation, not only was it illegal to build, now it was illegal to float. Karen had built her empire on sand, and I just turned the tide. No lawsuits, no yelling, just physics, patience, and a hydraulic winch named Gloria. Parent tried everything, filed 3 complaints, one environmental, one zoning, one that cited emotional distress caused by public flotation, all denied. She demanded a town hall. No one came. She posted a 4-minute video on the HOA's YouTube channel, trying to reframe the office's aquatic relocation as a community recentering. It got 11 views. One was mine. Another was my dog, who sat through the whole thing like he was waiting for her to say something intelligent. He never barked. Within 2 weeks, the floating office had taken on water. Turns out, Karen's empire was as watertight as her bylaws. The front deck sagged. The solar panels shorted. Someone graffitied HOA equals house on a float across the side in bubble letters. Eventually, the building drifted into a marshy inlet and stuck there like a bloated pontoon of shame. County officials declared it a navigational hazard and posted a removal notice. No one volunteered. Karen stopped showing up. Then came the great exodus. Lawn after lawn sprouted for sale signs like dandelions after a rainstorm. Some left quietly, others threw farewell parties. A few even dropped by my cabin to apologize. One guy brought a pie and said, "I never liked her gazebo." The HOA board formally dissolved in a single-sentence email. Effective immediately, all operations are suspended due to untenable liability. Translation, Karen sunk us, we're out. I hired a salvage crew to raise June Bell. Took a full day, 2 air bladders, and one diver who said, "Man, this is the most peaceful mutiny I've ever helped with." She came up, waterlogged but intact. I spent the next few weeks sanding, polishing, rewiring. Every screw was like turning back time. The first time she rumbled back to life, the lake actually rippled different, like it knew the right queen had returned to her throne. A doctor at her old spot, this time with a steel post and a sign, "Private trespassers will be featured on TikTok." But the final touch was the marker. I carved it from local granite, placed it exactly where the HOA office used to squat in smug silence. Big, bold letters, no fanfare. Here floated the house of ego, may it never anchor again. People take photos with it now. Some bring coffee. One lady added wildflowers. School kids do field trips. A few even call it the anti-monument. I just call it peace. And me? I sit on my porch each morning, boots on the railing, coffee in hand, lake breeze on my face. The flag still flaps at dawn like a warning shot, just in case someone else forgets who this land belongs to. No flyers, no pastel threats, no clipboards, just water, wind, and the sound of silence, the kind you earn. Some folks build community with kindness. Others build it with clipboards and fake authority. But let this story be a reminder, you can't outregulate someone who owns the land, the lake, and the deed with his name carved into granite. Karen tried to re-raw the map with pastel notices and weaponized newsletters, and she ended up with a floating office, a crumbling empire, and a permanent spot in local meme history. If there's a moral here, it's this. Don't bring bylaws to a landowner fight, especially not one with a drone, a GoPro, and a boat named after his mom. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment if you've ever dealt with a Karen in khakis. And hey, hit that like button harder than Karen hit send on her HOA email. Stay salty, stay smart, stay legal. See you in the next story.